towards the light. It was the last day of March, a day of treacherous beauty where the blinding sun clashed with the lingering chill against your nose, ears, and cheeks. Despite the winter's gentle caress, the arrival of spring felt like a cruel trick. I must admit, I was fooled by the beautiful weather that day. I took the bike out of the basement, dusted it off, and checked the tires. Then, without wasting any time, I went to the bike shop, bought a new inner tube and outer tire, and replaced them. I checked the brakes and oiled the chain. Next, I slipped into my ridiculous plastic sauna suit and my holy socks and plugged in my headphones. As I started pedaling to the music composed of samples from every country, I could also feel the slightly unpleasant breeze in the air. Without paying any attention to it, I indulged in romantic feelings, because at such times, unlike riding a motorcycle or driving a car, I felt like I was living life rather than just watching it. While I don't usually do this with others, bike rides often provide me with a chance to introspect. And I must admit, I frequently find myself feeling grateful. People often ask me, why bike when you have a car? But who pays any attention to that? A quick 20-minute drive, 10 minutes each way, would be perfect. That day, for some reason, after cycling, I felt a slight weariness, like spring fatigue, a drowsiness, and a vague headache. I found myself imagining lying in the lush, rain-soaked grass of the tree-lined garden, as if it were inviting me to rest. That secluded spot beneath the pine tree was the perfect place to lie down. Without hesitation, I slowly settled onto the natural bed. How pleasant. I realized that I was beginning to feel a sense of tranquility in all my limbs, as if I was being enveloped in comfort. It couldn't have been a laziness in brain functions, because my mind was working. Reflecting later, I admit that my state of mind at that moment aligned with the saying, even at the moment of death, there are things to be learned. I'm not entirely sure, but perhaps I was experiencing a state of mind similar to the one described by a philosopher whose name I can't recall, who compared it to the awareness of the transition between wakefulness and sleep. As I said, I was watching and talking to myself. The branches of the black pine above me and the grass I was lying on swayed in the breeze. Life was flowing past me relentlessly, yet I was rooted in place, merely observing. I don't know how long it was, but finally I thought I had to get up. If I kept lying like this, I was bound to catch a cold and get sick. However, I immediately realized that I couldn't get up. It felt as if my muscles weren't receiving commands from my brain. If I can get up, I will have accomplished a great job. I repeated this several times. If I could get up. After a while, my will won this struggle, and I slowly stood up. But I immediately realized that I had to watch my balance. I had to hold on to something. I could hardly get into the house, and I went straight to bed. After a while, somehow, I remembered to check my phone. Without getting up, I picked up the phone on the bedside table and saw that my sister had called me a few hours ago. When I turned to her, even though she didn't understand what I was saying, she immediately grasped the change in me that I hadn't noticed. My nephew was shouting from the other side of the receiver, "Uncle, turn off the television." Television? It was already off. Even if I objected, it was useless. She would send her son to get me. I don't remember how much time passed, but I realized that my nephew had arrived, calling out, "Uncle," along with a light moving around the pitch-dark room. I asked him for support because I was having trouble keeping my balance. We got into his car waiting outside the door and set off. Only then did I realize the sound of the music player still playing in the pocket of my sauna sweatpants. The sound of him telling me to turn off the TV so he could understand what I was saying while on the phone was the sound coming from the music player. Only then did I realize the sound of the music player still playing in the pocket of my sauna tracksuit. The sound of him telling me to turn off the TV so he could understand what I was saying while on the phone was the sound coming from the music player. It crossed my mind that he would think, "Look at the music my uncle listens to." The half-hour car ride ended at the entrance to the hospital emergency room. I was seated in a wheelchair and registered. We were waiting for the doctor to come. First, I barely made it to the bathroom. After I had done some of it on myself, half relieved, my eyes fell on my reflection in the window. I don't know if it was the effect of the light, but I thought that the reflected image was not mine. At the place where I was taken for examination, the doctor and nurses surrounded me. How beautiful this woman is. Oh my God, like an angel. I'm excited, but at the same time, I noticed the concern, bordering on fear, in her eyes as she looks at me. She wants me to talk. She asks me questions, asks me to lift my arms and legs. The nurses with her are also completely attentive. My doctor finally admitted me to the neurology ward. They hung a needle in my arm and a serum bottle over my bed. The next day, as soon as the shift started, they started to take blood from my arm for a continuous blood test. The nurse came to take blood for the second time because it was black and thick. Later, 2 adult nurses who were not from this ward and for some reason I suspected they were nurses. Also said that it was related to the epidemic while taking blood. On the morning of that eventful first day, another beautiful young woman came to visit me, but she just looked at me and then left without saying anything. Have I seen her before? I couldn't place her at first, but I soon remembered that I had been a patient of that beautiful lady at the same hospital a year ago. We were in the middle of an epidemic disaster that had an important place in world history, with more than 1 million deaths recorded globally, including many doctors and nurses. That weekend, we got together with friends for a picnic at a nearby lake. The municipality's roadside facilities overlooking the lake were excellent, with indoor and outdoor area, a large parking area, terraced pergolas with a view in front and backing onto the woodland, a small playground, and an artificial lake connected to the lake by a canal under the road. An impressive sight, as if the road ran through the middle of the water. We chose a pergola to our liking. Knowing that they would sit there for hours, I immediately left them and went to the lakeside on the other side of the road. The lake, which is the subject of history books, was even mentioned in books written hundreds of years ago. The settlement, located 5 to 10 kilometers away, was the summer residence of the sultans 900 years ago. The plain on which the lake is situated was surrounded by plateaus and a mountain with ice-cold water springs at its summit. Some of the more than 80 streams flowing down from the mountain had ponds built in front of them. But the main water collection area was formed by 2 dams, one on the mountain and the other on the plain. The packaging and marketing of water in the country did not go back very far. While the water of this mountain also contributed to economic life, the water level of the already shallow lake was decreasing every year, and the area it covered was shrinking. The ecosystem around the lake was a habitat for various birds. In the past, the lake was said to be a source of livelihood with its reeds and fish, floating islands, and peat production for potting soil. In recent years, however, it was claimed that the lake was in danger of drying up due to climate change. I'll admit it, we cheated fate that day and took a little time for ourselves. I spent the whole day lost in the moment, capturing life's precious details with my camera. The show of the birds waltzing over the lake was breathtaking. It was impossible not to see the harmony in the way they sometimes took off from where they were, glided as a flock, and then landed back in the water. A few villages with white minarets complemented the view on the hills opposite, with their rich plant diversity. As I reflected on what had happened, I began to wonder about the deeper meaning behind the act of capturing beauty and bringing it to light. I confess that, partly out of fear, I give up the search for nirvana and give myself over to the pleasure of aesthetics. When I reluctantly returned to the pergola where my friends were sitting, the samovar had boiled and the meat was ready on the barbecue. We sat down at the rich table and gorged ourselves, and then started to enjoy tea. But my friends had no intention of getting up from where they were sitting and walking around. I continued my walk along the lake shore without looking back from where I had left off. As I leave that day behind, I have no hesitation in admitting that the trip would have been unforgettable even in its current state. But what I experienced just 24 hours later made that day truly unforgettable. I was lying down at home, resting, thinking of getting rid of the fatigue of that trip where I spent long hours under the sun. The mood I was in was not an intuition. It was something different. I cannot describe it. Although I felt no physical symptoms, the thought crossed my mind that I could not speak. I couldn't believe that such a situation could be real, but it wasn't difficult to find out if it was true. If I could count aloud from 1 to 10, I would have shown myself that the idea was absurd. I tried to count. No sound came out of my mouth. I tried again. Aha. It's so strange. What an incomprehensible thing the human mind is. Look at what was going through my mind at that moment. Since I can't talk, I had things to do with the computer, so let me do them. I went to the computer, opened 2 files side by splitting the screen, and was going to copy a sentence from one and paste it to the other, but in vain. I couldn't see half of the computer screen. Incredibly, my field of vision narrowed. First the speech, then the loss of field of vision. But after a short time, these disturbing symptoms disappeared on their own, and I ignored it with stupid indifference. In those days, it was time for the 3rd vaccination. I came across news on the internet about the side effects of vaccines related to the pandemic. It was said that the symptoms I experienced were seen in people who had these vaccines. Before I got vaccinated, I went to my family doctor and told him about the incredible discomfort I was experiencing and the news about the vaccines. His eyes widened, and he said seriously that these symptoms were not a side effect of the vaccines. I don't know if it was because he knew I would neglect it if he left it to me, but he immediately made an appointment for me at the neurology department of the nearby hospital. One winter day, when the roads were closed due to snowfall and I was thinking with great anxiety about how I was going to get to the hospital, believe me, hearing that the roads had been opened to service without feeling any sense of relief revived me in a mood that suited me perfectly. Finally, I arrived at the hospital, and when I took my place for examination, I saw that there were more people waiting inside to receive treatment than outside. Finally, the moment came. When I saw my name on the illuminated board indicating that it was my turn, I entered the doctor's office. I confess that I had an incomprehensible feeling that the very young and beautiful woman in front of me was not fit to be a doctor. She listened to my complaint with perfect attention and seriousness. Then she asked me to have an MRI and a CT scan. She then said that there were no findings in the films, however. Due to my approaching old age, she told me that I should continue to use the blood thinner she prescribed me as a part of my life from now on. After a while, when I went for a checkup, he released me on parole. However, I can't say that I strictly followed the rules, such as taking my medication regularly. This was the doctor who came to visit me in the hospital, and I never saw him again. My new doctor, whom I met in the middle of the night as if possessed by demons, had a different way of approaching her patients, which I noticed not immediately but later. I saw in her a caring embrace that reminded me of the affectionate, unwavering approach of a mother to her child. This seemed to me, quite obviously, unexpected. This conviction was reinforced as I heard her impressive voice coming from the adjoining rooms during her rounds every day. The needle inserted into my arm for the serum became a part of my body for 10 days. A thick file was created about me. When I was wheeled from one floor to another with a nurse for an ultrasound about my heart, I finally had a convincing idea about the causes of my illness. Cardiological neurological thing. No situation is as simple as it seems. The basis of my nervous system disorder is a disorder in my blood circulation system. But finding the cause of the disorder in my blood circulation system is an adventure, like a journey to the first cause in the chain of causes. And this adventure is not for doctors, but for philosophers. What I saw in the hospital was this. The doctors and nurses were doing the best they could. It is not right to blame them for not being able to prevent death. In any case, I was eventually discharged. We're getting together with friends. After a while, someone turns to me and asks, "What happened?" What could happen? There's nothing. Is there really nothing? No way. There is. There's a lot. I mutter, "My dear, it went away with yesterday." All the words belong to yesterday. But he was insistent. There is. There is. Of course, there is always something. And do you have the patience to listen? The other one interjected. Just get started. The other day, an old video on the ministry's website caught my attention, and I watched this program twice, which unexpectedly took me back in time. It was a black and white documentary about the inauguration ceremony of a large dam about 70 years ago. It is highly probable that most of the people seen in those shots are no longer alive today. In fact, the engineer who took part in the construction of the dam, and who was briefly in the frame while receiving an award in the documentary, and who later became known as the King of Dams, passed away years ago. I guess there weren't many extraordinary events that brought so many people together that day, leaving their work aside. That region was known throughout its history for the rains that turned into floods in the winter and spring months, but it was actually a region that promised abundance for the future. In the face of floods that occur every 5 or 6 years and cause loss of life and property every time, it can be said that the decision of the administrators to build dams was also influenced by reasons such as electricity generation and the transition to irrigated agriculture that would increase agricultural yields. Long before the start of those ceremonies in early April, people in their new clothes could be seen gathering in groups around the city. In a festive atmosphere, the arches erected in various parts of the city were decorated, and everywhere was adorned with flags. Groups of men and women, young and old, on top of the cars, holding huge frames with the photographs of the statesmen, with welcome signs, with the sound of drums and zurna, were enthusiastically welcoming the statesmen. Finally, the excitement among the people reached its peak when the president and prime minister, accompanied by bureaucrats, arrived at the station on a black train, with white smoke billowing from its chimney. The crowd, which would not fall to the ground if you dropped a needle, was moving from side to side with an irresistible force like the waves of the sea, and it was obvious how inadequate the security forces, who were locked arms with each other, were in maintaining control. The prime minister and the president greeted the people in an open-top white Cadillac, with bodyguards in front and behind them, and drove to the town hall, where they were to deliver a speech on the balcony. After the speeches, first by the president and then by the prime minister, in front of the huge crowd, an almost unstoppable stream of people traveled in various vehicles to the dam site, 15 kilometers away. Here, those who had contributed to the construction of the massive structure that would shape the fate of the region were honored, and the dam, which had been holding water since winter and had turned into a long lake, was finally officially inaugurated. Would you believe me if I told you that my uncle was one of the countless people who watched the ceremonies that day? I paused the video and searched for him in the crowd for a long time, as if I could find him. I think he was around 40 years old, and as a person with the past experience of the people of the region, he had relived the most painful memory of his life that day, which never left his mind. The moments of their struggle for survival almost 20 years ago, when their self-built mud brick house in their poor neighborhood was slowly melting into water, are deeply ingrained in their memory. At the beginning of winter, after days of incessant rains, the floods completely submerged most of the residential areas and turned the city into a huge lake. The river flowing through its center rose 5.5 meters above its normal level. Households, young and old, were on their rooftops, anxiously waiting to be rescued. In a short time, some of these houses sooner or later began to fall apart, depending on the materials used in their construction. Hundreds of houses were thus destroyed and submerged in water. It was seen that the municipal teams could not reach many places, were helpless, and inevitably left the disaster victims alone. The terrified screams of the people on the roofs of the houses that were scattered and mixed with the water were cut off forever as they were submerged in the water. But those moments of terror and those desperate cries were forever and indelibly engraved in the memories of those who witnessed what happened. It saddens me to think that the suffering caused by the helplessness my uncle experienced gnawed at his soul like a harmful insect throughout his life, and that many lives have been darkened by such experiences, just as his own. In the first days of this disaster, which had never been seen before in the history of the city, and which seemed to be coming due to the continuous rainfall at the beginning, lack of foresight, confusion, not knowing what to do, and incompetence were dominant. The governor's office, the municipality, and the Red Crescent could not find the means to provide aid to the people. Work began immediately after the disaster, and thousands of citizens whose homes were submerged were relocated to mosques, inns, and large buildings. Later, the waters receded naturally. The thick layer of mud and large piles of rubble that covered almost the entire city, as if reminiscent of the aftermath of the flood, were cleaned. The Red Crescent and other organizations tried to heal the wounds of the disaster. Aid such as tents, food, clothing, health supplies, coal, wood, and money were provided. As a result, approximately 1/3 of the city's population was directly affected by the disaster. Many people lost their lives, and countless animals perished. When I was silent for a long time, someone asked. And then, my uncle was not a talkative person. When he and my father got together, they didn't talk much about their shared memories. As if a sponge had been pulled over the past, they never went beyond simple and current issues. When I compare myself to both of them, I think I have a personality that is almost the opposite of theirs. Besides, we didn't have the opportunity to come together much during our life struggles. Even after my father passed away, I didn't see the facial expression he maintained throughout his life, like the mask on the faces of ancient Greek tragedians, change. His usual distant, serious, cold face, suggestive of worry and sadness. He visited me a few times later. Perhaps he was hoping to find his brother in me. I think he must have seen that I was nothing like my father, was disappointed, and somehow accepted it. I was full of life. I was laughing, having fun. I had a wide circle of friends. I enjoyed living. I had everything they didn't have. In his last years, somehow, I called him on one occasion. My uncle was a long-lived man with an evil face, but when we last met, it was obvious that the old man had also collapsed physically. I don't want to think that he and my father made their lives miserable for themselves because of that bitter experience when he was in the prime of his youth, when he lost the whole family except his brother. But what can you do?